This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Today on CityCast Philly, 2021 was a violent year in Philly. Since then, the number of shootings has gone way down, with half as many homicides this year in 2024 compared to this time back in 2021. That's according to the Philadelphia Inquirer. Some think it's at least partially because of some recent arrests of gang members. I'm speaking with a criminal justice and law enforcement reporter to shed some light on the state of gang violence in Philly. It's Monday, June 10th. I'm Trinae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Ellie Rushing, criminal justice and law enforcement reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thanks for being here on CityCast Philly.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always great to be here.
Ellie, last week you reported about a young man who defied the so-called code of silence, right? A lot of people may call this snitching, but it was his testimony that resulted in the convictions of gang members in connection with 4 murders. Before we get into that story, can you just tell me more about this code of silence and really its impact on crime in Philly over the years?
Sure. So witnesses have always been very fearful of coming forward, and for good reason. We have seen witnesses and people who have told police information get murdered before, even when they have police protection. And so for that reason, it's very rare for people to come to police with information. Often, I hear it every day, police hear it every day. Even on a crowded street in the middle of broad daylight, if a shooting happens, police will often go and they'll ask people outside, what did you see? What did you hear? And very often people say they didn't see anything, they didn't hear anything, because they're rightfully very fearful of retaliation. They live in these neighborhoods, they interact with many of the people who are shooting, their neighbors and their friends. And word spreads very quickly when someone is cooperating or gives information to police.
For sure. Now, can you tell me more about what happened in 2021 and why this young man's decision to speak up was so unprecedented?
Starting around 2019, but really ramping up in 2020, the city saw its rate of gun violence escalate to levels that it had really never seen before in city history. 2021 in particular was the most violent year on record in Philadelphia. There were more than 560 people who were murdered in just 1 year. And so looking at just a few of those murders in West Philadelphia, on May 25th, there were 2 young men who were shot and killed within 30 minutes of each other, an 18-year-old in Mantua who was there to see his girlfriend. His name was Nasir Marks. And then Kanye Pittman, a 15-year-old up in North Philadelphia. Just 30 minutes apart, they were shot and killed in one night. Fast forward a few more months, on July 21st, 2021, KJ Johnson and Tommy Frazier, 2 friends who were in their car on the way to basketball practice, were also shot and killed. Around that same time, there was an 18-year-old boy who was in Philadelphia for the summer. He had grown up in Philadelphia. He had a lot of family here. His mother had actually moved him out of the city about 5 years earlier because she worried for his safety and knew that he was hanging out with people in his family or people in the neighborhood who she worried he could get involved in crime with. His grandma had died that summer, and so he came back to the city and spent the summer here. And so while he was here, someone in his family was very involved in this gang called the Young Bag Chasers or the Young Face Arrangers. I'm just going to say YBC because they're kind of synonymous, and that's just the more well-known name and group. And so he found himself here that summer around all of the members of YBC. And they would talk about the shootings that they'd done. They talked about the people that they killed. And 4 of the people that they killed were Nasir Marks, Kanye Pittman, KJ Johnson, and Tommy Frazier.
The victims you just mentioned.
And so, he had this information. Finally, it ends up coming together. He ended up getting arrested in a stolen car. He'd never been involved with the police before. He was freaking out. He was panicking. He's facing felony charges. And he decides to tell the police that he had information about these murders. And his testimony ended up being crucial to solving those 4 murders.
Any insight of just like the reaction from law enforcement when he spoke up?
Well, I think police at first were really surprised. I talked to one detective who said that he'd never seen a young man do something like this before, to really speak up and share information that was so crucial. And that he ended up bringing YBC to its knees, he said, and really helped almost dismantle the group.
But why did he speak up, though?
Well, I think at first he wanted to help himself, right? He didn't want to have a stolen car felony charge on his record for the rest of his life. He's a young kid. His mom said that he also kind of saw himself in KJ, the 16-year-old who was killed that summer. KJ was a basketball player. He was very well loved and respected. He wasn't in the streets, but he knew people who were. And so I think the witness kind of felt that, right? He's around all these people who are talking about crime. He's not involved in the crime himself, but he could kind of relate and see himself in this kid who is killed on his way to basketball practice. And, his mom said that she thinks that played a role in really just, he wanted to clear his conscience. He wanted to get out of the city. He wanted to get away from all this drama that he had been involved in, and coming clean about it helped him do that.
I'm curious though, Ellie, what have you heard from the families of the victims? What's been the impact for them since his testimony?
So the families actually didn't know a lot of the backstory in terms of just really how this kid ended up coming into the middle of the case. They were there during the trial, but a lot of just kind of the backstory of how he ended up kind of falling into the police department's lap almost out of luck. They didn't really know that element. So I went over the story with them before it published. And KJ Johnson's mother, Emily, she started to cry. She's thinking about this kid and imagining everything that he went through to help bring her son's case to justice. And she said, "I love him with every ounce of love that I have left. I thank him, and KJ loves him." And Kanye Pittman's mom, Shawnee Pittman, says that he was a hero to her in that moment, that she knows how brave and how difficult doing something like that really is. And so they were really grateful. And, I think just the impact was certainly not lost on them.
Are things changing at all in regards to this code of silence in light of this young man's story, or is it still just as effective at keeping people silent?
It's hard to say. I think in some ways it shows why many people don't ever speak up, right? Why would somebody really want to put themselves in that position? This witness now has to live over 1,000 miles away. He can never come back to Philadelphia. If, a close member of his family, if a sibling, if his father, God forbid, were to have a heart attack tomorrow and die, he would not be able to come here for that funeral because his life is still at such great risk. Wow. When he came here to testify, he had to stay in a hotel outside of the city with his mom under a fake name. They did not even tell police where they were staying because they felt like they couldn't trust anybody. And so I think it just really shows what's at stake, why so many people never speak up. He was really depressed after he testified. He felt like he had failed his family. People online still talk about him. They write about him in songs. He still feels scared every day. And so, I think this is something that's just so ingrained in Philadelphia, in all communities that are really impacted by crime. And it's not just because people don't want to speak up. It's because they can't always trust the police when they do either, right? It goes both ways. And so I think it would require a lot of community building to really get past and improve witnesses' abilities to come forward more often.
More on this story after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Sign up to The Economist for in-depth curated expert analysis of world events and topics ranging from business and culture to science and technology. You'll get the weekly digital edition, online-only articles, curated newsletters on politics, the markets, science, culture, and China, and full access to The Economist Podcast Plus. The Economist is independent journalism for independent thinking. Go to economist.com and get your first month free.
Ellie, I want to get into some other news that broke last week on gang violence in the city. You reported that a West Philly gang member known as Pistol P pleaded guilty last week in shooting 9 people and killing 3 in 2021. Can you tell me more about this trial, what's next, and what this outcome means for gang violence in Philly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what's been especially interesting is, at the end of last year, at the beginning of this year, is that we are finally seeing how so many of the shootings from 2021 are all linked and fit together, right? So, I talked about YBC and YFA earlier. They're one group in West Philly, but there are little groups all across the city. And so another group that was involved in a lot of shootings in West Philly was called O to the 4. And they, O to the 4 stands for like 60th to 64th Street in West Philly. And so this member, his name is Anthony Lacey Woodson, but he goes mostly by Pistol P. He pleaded guilty last Monday to shooting 9 people in just a span of a few months and killing 3 of them. And, this whole feud was tied to, the killing of 2 of his friends in late 2020. And it just sparked this whole war between his group and another group in the neighborhood. This feud alone, prosecutors have tied to 53 shootings in 11 months in the city, including the deaths of 16 people. And over half of the victims had nothing to do with any of this. And so actually, Pistol P, when he pleaded guilty on Monday to these shootings of 3 people who he killed, had nothing to do with it. They were not the targets that he was going after when he opened fire in the middle of a block or in the middle of a block party. And this is part of a greater strategy in the district attorney's office in partnership with the police department to look at these groups. And so they've been taking down kind of group by group, piece by piece, from west to southwest to South Philly to North Philly.
Speaking of the district attorney's office, last week, District Attorney Larry Krasner made a huge announcement saying that 8 members of the BNG, or the Big Natty Gang from Strawberry Mansion, were arrested for the deaths of at least 4 people throughout North Philadelphia and also a string of other shootings. What stood out to you from this announcement?
Well, DA Krasner said really that BNG is history now, that BNG is no longer around. These arrests wiped out the final members of the group. And that isn't something that we see every day. I mean, even in YBC and in O to the 4, there's still members. There's still kind of younger people who are coming up in the ranks and who are taking over positions. And it's really hard to get rid of some of these groups. But, Krasner claims that BNG is history. And I guess we'll see if that's true.
Ellie, have these gang-related arrests impacted safety in the city?
Well, police, some people that I've talked to think that, the indictments of these groups have really helped reduce the level of violence in the city. As you said earlier, the number of shootings in the city right now are half of what they were in 2021. And there's so many reasons for that. And it's really hard to know exactly what is driving down the number, the gun violence in the city. But one idea is that, we now have, O to the 4, YBC, BNG, groups that prosecutors, they've only been able to charge these members with, maybe 5 to 9 shootings, but they believe that they're linked to a lot more. And city officials have always said that a small number of people in the city are responsible for a lot of the violence. But the reality is that these groups are just a few of the dozens that are across the city. It's kind of a debated topic whether Philadelphia really has gangs or not. A lot of people sometimes call them street groups or groups, but still taking down these 4 or 5 in the last kind of 2 years or so. These were some of the larger, more notorious groups that were committing many shootings together at once. Some of the people who have been arrested are considered some of the most prolific shooters. And police and prosecutors say that they really have no doubt that if they were still out there, they probably would still be doing shootings, right? That cycle of retaliation continues. And so people do think that this really has helped reduce the amount of violence this year.
So what's the state of gang violence in Philly?
This has really become a top priority for the police department, for the DA's office. Within the last few years, the district attorney's office, gun violence task force expanded. They are the ones who really drill into these groups and work with federal agencies, with city agencies, and they're matching ballistic evidence. They're monitoring all these people's social media accounts. They're finding the ways to link all these shootings and build a really strong case. And as we've seen, sometimes these cases haven't been able to be built for a few years. They just, brought down a group that was committing shootings in 2018. It takes a really long time to build these cases. And so I think people have to, sometimes be patient. And that's really hard when you're seeing people being shot and killed in your family, in your neighborhood every day. But the police and the DA's office just want to assure the public that none of these shootings are necessarily being forgotten. They're putting the links together. It just takes time.
All right, that was Ellie Rushing, criminal justice and law enforcement reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Ellie, thank you so much for explaining the story to me on CityCast Philly.
Thank you so much, Trinae, for having me again.
Read more of Ellie's reporting by clicking the link in our show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Let us know what you think of this episode. Rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.